Welcome to the Animal Training Fundamentals Podcast, where we have fun with practical application and we get mental with the science of behavior. Put them both together and you get results, solutions for your behavior problems, and the tools you need to achieve your training goals. I'm your host, Barbara Heidenreich. Let's talk training. Hey guys, thanks for joining me here on the Animal Training Fundamentals Podcast with Barbara Heidenreich. It's me, your host, back after a little bit of a hiatus. I had a lot of things going on and, well, sometimes things just have to take a back seat, and it was the podcast this time. But I'm back and back with a bang because I've got some wonderful guests that are here to talk to us about the constructional approach to animal welfare and training. You all have been hearing me talk about this topic a lot if you've been coming to some of my virtual presentations over the last year or so, but you may not really know exactly what this topic means in great detail. And that's why I wanted to invite my guests here to speak with us today, because they really get into the meat and potatoes of this topic. And this is a really rich podcast interview, so I know you're going to love this one. But first, let me introduce our guests to you. I have Sean Will and Maasa Nishimuta, who are the co-founders of the Constructional Approach to Animal Welfare and Training, which is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide free services to individuals and organizations that cannot afford them. And this is with the goal of enhancing their lives through applications of the Constructional Approach. Now, this organization is pretty awesome, and you're going to hear a lot more about it in the podcast. So I'm probably going to save a bit more content about that as we get into the podcast. And let me tell you a little bit more about Sean. Sean studied under Dr. Jesus Rosales Ruiz, and he earned a master's degree in behavior analysis. You know, we are big fans of behavior analysis around here. And that was from the University of North Texas up there in Denton. And while studying at UNT, he spearheaded the development of constructional affection. I know a lot of you have heard about CAAWT, which is constructional aggression treatment, but you may not have heard about constructional affection yet, so this is pretty cool. And he developed that under the instruction of Dr. Jesus Rosales Ruiz and developed constructional shelter programs to increase efficiency in local animal shelters. Sean has over 15 years of experience as a professional trainer and has provided consulting for individuals and organizations that oversee the care of animals. And currently, Sean is in Florida Tech's doctoral program researching problem solving and animal training. And Masa also studied under Dr. Jesus Rosales Ruiz and earned her master's degree in behavior analysis, also from the University of North Texas. In her master's thesis, she studied the reinforcing effects of affection in the form of petting and gentle scratching with rescued equines. She modified constructional affection for use with equines and continues to apply constructional affection with animals in shelters where she volunteers. So I'm really excited to bring you Sean and Masa, and let's get into this interview. Oh my gosh, it's been a while since I've done a podcast. I've been taking a break from podcasts due to many things going on in my life, but I'm so excited to have Sean Will and Maasa Nishimuta from the Constructional Approach to Animal Welfare and Training. And a lot of people have heard me say the Constructional Approach a lot, but I don't think people know what that means. And so I'm very excited to have both of you here because you're going to help explain what this means. So first of all, let me welcome you guys. Welcome.
Thank you, Mama.
Hey, Barbara. Good to see you.
Yes, good to see you as well. And I might explain first where we met. We actually met at the Art and Science of Animal Training Conference, right? Is that where we first met each other? Yes. Because as we I guess I explained in your bios, you are both students. We're students at the University of North Texas at Denton in the Applied Behavior Analysis program there. So that conference is very rich in that program there with students from that program and exploring the science and of course the art of animal training. But the constructional approach really kind of I think it maybe kind of grew from that program. Would you say? Does that sound correct?
Well, for us, it did.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Jesus Rosales Ruiz, he's an amazing professor, and he and his students, Orca, they're the ones that put together and run that amazing conference. And Jesus might be the only place that I know of where you can actually go get a college education that will introduce the work of Dr. Israel Goldiman. And that's really where the constructional approach extends from. And so the approach it's got an interesting background, especially, thinking about some of the things that are facing not only animal training, but behavior analysis as a whole right now. Because Izzy created, I say Izzy, that's the nickname of Dr. Israel Goldiman. Izzy made the approach because he was a little bit disappointed and a little bit, he was a little bit taken back by some of the procedures that he saw going on at the time when he was developing the constructional approach. So he wanted to develop an approach that would help people to guide them on how to apply behavior analytic principles. So the approach isn't a procedure itself or a program. The constructional approach doesn't just mean that we're shaping. It doesn't mean that you're just doing constructional aggression treatment or constructional affection. It's just a general way that you approach going about behavior change and selecting programs and going through the program itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's constructional approach is not a set of a procedure. It's an approach. There's 5 elements to it in the approach, and then that will allow you to analyze what's the contingency there, what is the starting point, and then how that will give you designing program to meet the goal. So, yeah.
So you mentioned those 5 elements, and I keep thinking about that now myself, the more that I've been learning about constructional approach. And I think when I first started on this journey, I didn't really know much about these 5 elements, although I may have been speaking a little bit about some of those elements. Maybe you can touch a little bit on what those 5 elements are.
Yeah. So construction approach, we start with the first element is that we set a goal. We set a very clear, descriptive goals that are good, that are from the client that we are working with. So we are not going to push the goals that we think it's great for the client. We ask, assuming everything is successful, what would the outcome be? What would the outcome be for you? So the clients be able to say, oh, I want to set this goal, and then it's clear, and then it's descriptive.
Yeah, and this is an important part of the process too, because when we talk about the constructional approach, the alternative would be the pathological approach. And so anytime that we're going about solving a problem, a behavior problem that's on our hands, we can take a pathological approach or we can take a constructional approach. And in the pathological approach, we're focused on viewing the behavior as like a pathology. It's a problem that needs to be eliminated. And so that puts you in an automatically different spot when going about selecting your behavior change programs. And in the constructional approach, we would never go to eliminate a problem behavior. Never once when I went into a dog's enclosure at a shelter did I go in there with the intention to eliminate or reduce barking. My intention is always to increase certain behaviors. And that's a key component of setting our target goal in a constructional approach, is that we're stating that goal in terms of behaviors to be established. And those behaviors which we're establishing, it's the absence of those behaviors that's actually the problem in the first place. And so that's a key piece, that we see the problem behavior more as a symptom of missing repertoire that we need to train.
Yeah. So the central question is what behavior needs to be established, the absence of which is a problem. So in constructional approach, we don't see behavior as a problem. It's like John was saying, it's that we are having a missing repertoire. We have to teach that to fulfill the contingency. And the second element is that what we called, where are we now? Like, what's the currently relevant repertoire? The animal and then the human, both of them are already having it, that are relevant to the program or the goal that we set in the first element. And then what are the resources that it's already there that we can maximize so that they can be successful going step throughout the program?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this is one that's maybe overlooked more often than not in most training scenarios. we'll go in to work with an individual, and we know when we get so wrapped up in building these behaviors that we know we can establish in the dogs, that we can often overlook the humans that are going to be required to be a part of this program. And so we want to make sure that we're actually accounting for both of the beings inside these programs and putting in something that both parties are going to be able to carry out in our absence. And so it sometimes can be a sticky thing to give an individual control over a program that they've never experienced before, that has a lot of difficult inner working parts. And so we want to make sure that we're leaving something and giving something to someone that they can actually participate in and do themselves in our absence.
Yeah. And, there's a questionnaire, the Constructional Questionnaire. Constructional Questionnaire. And then that questionnaire will reveal all of these 5 elements that we're going to talk about. The first thing, set the goal, and then current relevant repertoire. And sometimes when you ask the question, sometimes the ideal problem, the ideal behavior is already there in a different environment or different setting. So it's the matter of finding out what are the conditions that you want to start training so that you are using the thing that's already there.
You have this really cool membership program at the Constructional Approach to Animal Welfare and Training, and you do these open houses. I guess this is with your premium membership. Is that right? All the members can join the open house? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Cool. So in your open house, you recently went over some of the questions in the questionnaire. Is that right? If I recall correctly. And so you really got into the details of how people use the questionnaire to develop some of these repertoires that you're talking about, or how they can figure out where it might be a starting point. And even what you were talking about, like, is the learner or the person who's going to be implementing the program able to do they have the repertoire to do this? And how you were talking about some of the different types of training programs out there might be difficult for some people to implement. And so, even, doing, a clicker training type thing might be beyond the skill set of the person that you're working with. This might be too much for them to think about, too much mechanics, that this might not be the appropriate thing for that household to try to implement with their dog. And so, if you're working with a family with a dog or something. And so I loved how what you were exploring was, that kind of level of detail using this questionnaire that was developed by Israel Gold Diamond and now sort of being adapted for a community working with animals in their home.
Yeah. And the questionnaire, I gotta, give credit back to Dr. Jesus Rosales Ruiz again and his amazing graduate program at UNT. He had I think still has an amazing laboratory over there. I think the name is maybe changed on it now is what's happened, but it was the Constructional Mentoring Lab way back in the day when we both got to learn in there. And there we actually took the questionnaire and the entire interview process that's outlined in Gold Diamond's 1974 paper. And we actually modified that to use not only with students that were on academic probation at the university, but also parents with children with disabilities at different clinics around the area. And the really fun thing about that process is seeing how much can actually be uncovered that we can use to start investigating and building good programs with just by asking a few of these questions. And the amazing thing outside of gathering all of that great data and all that great information is that it really seemed to allow those individuals that were needing help to actually feel like they were being listened to. And oftentimes, like when I'm experiencing a problem, it can actually be really hard for me. Like if I'm trying to talk to Masa about the problem that I'm experiencing, sometimes it can actually be really hard to even accurately communicate what it is that's bothering me, because I'm actually so wrapped up in the emotions of the contingency that I'm experiencing. And so it can really help to have someone that has a set of good questions that can help guide you to actually start thinking about what it is that's bothering me, what is it that I actually want out of this situation, and how can we go about getting this thing. And so the questionnaire and the process involved, it's just an outstanding thing. And, I don't ever expect any trainer to take all 88 of those questions or whatever they are. But, there's a handful that we can take out of there and just kind of keep in our pockets whenever we're going out and working with zoos and people in different places to make sure that we have those specific ones in our repertoire to get to some of the meat of what people are experiencing and what they would like to gain.
Yeah. I agree. Like the sets of questions that is going to reveal the second part, current relevant repertoires and resources. There are so many questions to reveal it. And then when the individual is starting to think about what skills do I already have, what strength and assets can I bring to this table, they are like, wow, I have this skill. I have solved this similar problem before. They are getting a little bit more, okay, I can do this. There's reinforcers starting to kicking in, and they are kind of starting to really work together. And then, the individual can be honest about what they have and then answer those questions later. So it's a good questions.
We talk about a little bit of this in the Izzy bio that we just released that you were talking about. It's our On the Shoulders of Giants biography. And you hear, I think it's maybe Izzy's son, either that or one of his students. And they're talking about when being done with the interview that the people would walk out of there feeling like they would say things like, Izzy's great and I'm great. And that's really what you want people to feel like when you've gone through this questions, that they realize, oh, I wanted this and I've got all of this stuff over here that can help me get it. Like, let's do this. This is achievable.
Yeah, I'm ready. Yeah.
So since you mentioned it, and we'll come back to our 5 parts of the program very quickly, why don't you mention what is this biography about Israel Gold Diamond, just so that since it's been mentioned.
It's been something that's been a year in the works with Masa and I. As we were developing our nonprofit, the Constructional Approach to Animal Welfare and Training, and doing our podcast, the more people that we started to come into contact with, they really wanted more than just the procedures that we were offering. And everybody was really curious about the constructional approach and where it came from. And it led to a lot of discussions about Dr. Israel Gold Diamond. And Masa and I, because we had the privilege, much like you, of being really close to Dr. Joe Lang, who's a student of Izzy Gold Diamond. We knew a handful of stories just from hanging out with Joe, but we wanted to get deeper into the meat of who Izzy was, not just as a scientist either, but as a person. And so we got a hold of Dr. Joe Lang and Dr. Paul Andronis, and we interviewed them just to that was our intention for it originally, was just to have a little thing like us talking right now, with Joe and Paul about Izzy. And as we did it, we ended up being told, oh, we got to get in touch with these people and these people and these people. And we don't know this part of his life, but this person does. And before you knew it, it turned into a monster. And we had spent like 6 months interviewing friends of his, family members. We got a hold of his son, his daughters, lots of his students, and got all of their stories about this amazing individual. And it really is mind-boggling how crazy and how much of his life seems like it touched nearly every important aspect of history, during the time that he was alive. It's like he played a hand in everything. But getting those stories together, what we wanted to do then was to put it together in a succinct manner, where it was almost like everybody's story was just telling one succinct story. And so that's what we put together, and we decided to call it the On the Shoulders of Giants, because that's something that Dr. Jesus Rosales Ruiz always said to us as Orca students. And I know it started as some people say Newtonian, but it goes before that. Or I mean, not Newton. Yeah, it was Newton.
That was English,
but it actually goes further back than that. We won't get into the history, but it's a beautiful statement that really represents that scientific mindset of, continuing off of where the masters were. But we're finishing up this Izzy one right now, and then our next one should be we're looking at Ogden Lindsley and maybe Susan Markle. We haven't decided.
Wow! So you'll keep on doing these. Oh my gosh, exciting! Yeah. Well, and I feel very lucky that I got to listen to what you have put together so far on that, and I think it's amazing how it does seem to explain where these ideas would have come from. His life story does seem to help us understand why he would have come up with these ideas and why we would be using this information to this day. So I do recommend people listen to it when they get the chance, when it's officially released.
Yeah.
And that to me is really the beautiful thing about it is sometimes because of, the nonlinear thinking of Dr. Golddiamond, it's really a lot to get acquainted with. And I know me as an individual and most people that I know that it can be a struggle sometimes to start to see things that way because we're so accustomed to looking at things through the typical, what we would call the linear fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And so having that history, I think you're absolutely right. Seeing where he came from and how that ended up influencing the way that he had to view and work with the world around him, that I think it really does help to make it a little bit more clear what he means by nonlinear and what he means by being constructional.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
It's an inspiring story.
Yeah.
Very inspiring. So it'll be it's timely, for what I think a lot of people are going through lately as well. I think it's an appropriate time for it to come out as well. So I think a lot of people will be moved by it. Yeah. So thank you for that. Thank you for making that for everyone.
That was fun. It was a labor of love. It really was.
We're going to take a little break to give you your first secret word. And the secret word is Izzy. I-Z-Z-Y. Izzy. Secret words are important to remember and submit to show you that you have listened to this podcast for your professional development. Listening to podcasts are required for earning certain badges in the virtual learning program, animaltrainingfundamentals.com. All right, let's get back to the program.
So let's get back to number 3.
Number 3 is change procedure.
Okay.
Yes.
And in change procedure is, so like up to now, we have the first one, we set the very clear goal. We specify where we want to go. And then we also specify the starting point where the program will start. So the change procedure will fill in the gap from where we are now to where we want to go. And in constructional program or construction approach, it's a program step. It's like a step-by-step fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you watch a Where Do We Go From Here video series that Israel Golddiamond did back in like 70, he would say step by step fashion, it will go from where we are now to where we want to go. So the program should be individualized. It's not cookie cutter treatment package that you will throw because you are having stereotypy or because it's a separation anxiety. It's individualized because the goal and the starting point is already individualized. So yeah, every step is a little bit of a change of a requirement from the previous one, but the animal or the individual can attain it, and then it will go step by step fashion.
And the examples and everything you said just then was fantastic. And I just wanted to elaborate on that step-by-step point that you're bringing up, because it's really critical too that we keep in mind that we're taking a constructional approach to this. So that step-by-step should never be a process of reduction. So whenever we're dealing with separation anxiety, like you mentioned a second ago, it would never be, our goal would never be reduction of damage or reduction of barking or reduction of scratching up the carpet or whatever it might be. What we would actually be looking for is step by step of building some behavior. So when we see that separation anxiety, we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, when we leave home, what is it that we would like to see, our dog doing? Or what was that we would like to see, whatever this animal is? Instead of doing that problem behavior, what would we like to see them doing?
Right.
And so where we are now is that step A that you're outlining. And then that goal, I want my dog to be, sitting on the couch watching the Flintstones while I leave the house or whatever it might be. And so we want to build those steps in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah.
All right. So does that take us to number 4?
Yeah, that it's really, the number 4 is kind of really, how to say, number 3 and 4 is like together, because number 4 is maintaining consequences. So in construction approach, from behavior analysis, so we make sure that the behavior is maintaining throughout the program, but also after we're done with the program, to make sure that the behavior is so maintaining in the natural environment. So what are the consequences that we have to build in during the program, and then what will be after the program?
Right. And this brings up some interesting things to think about when we're talking about maintaining consequences, because it can kind of be different when we're talking about problem behavior that we're having to deal with, or when we're just teaching an animal something.
A new behavior.
Yeah, brand new
Brand
behavior.
new.
Exactly.
Mm.
And so it seems a lot more not cookie cutter, a lot more clear cut when we're talking about problem behavior, because there what we're talking about is what is it that problem behavior is obtaining. And so we can learn that by watching and observing and maybe collecting some data, and then presenting a little bit of an assessment session where we find out, okay, we think that it's this that's maintaining it. Let's present it, see if it maintains the behavior. Oh, yes, it does. Okay, it's definitely this thing. And so with problem behavior, you can very easily, put in that assessment. But when we're talking about training a brand new thing, we have to consider multiple things. One, not only that the animal may not already have this behavior in their repertoire. It may not be something like a sit where the dog already obviously knows how to sit. We're not teaching it how to sit. We're putting a brand new stimulus control cue onto an existing behavior. If they don't have it, we might have to put in something that maybe is an extrinsic reinforcer, like a food treat or something, to get that behavior going, to teach the animal what to do. That way we can shift that behavior later on to be maintained by the consequences that we would like that new behavior that we have to be maintained by in the finished setting. And so it can be a little bit different depending on what our context is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I would say, Barbara, your work on using constructional approach to address fear behavior are totally like you are listening to the animals or animals. What are the critical consequences? What's the consequence that's maintaining running away from the humans and all of that? And then you're listening and you're using that same consequence in a step-by-step fashion from starting point where it's escaping and now approaching you. So that's a beautiful, beautiful program of application of that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so the fifth.
Yeah.
The fifth step, the last one, is that it's called performance data. And we would like to be guided we want to be judging what we're going to do next in our next trial or next session. What are the decision that we make all throughout the program needs to be guided by the data, objective data.
Yeah. Behavior analysis is where Masa and I come from. And a lot of even animal training in general these days takes a lot of its cues from behavior analysis. And one thing that is fundamental to behavior analysis is that we are collecting data and that we make our decisions based on that data. If we're not doing those two things, we're actually not doing behavior analysis. Those are definitely what we would consider critical features. And so whenever we're doing a program, it's much better to go by the data that we've collected to make our future decisions than to go by a gut feeling. And I like to think about it like if we're on a jet and like, let's say we're going to Japan, to go do some conference or something like that. And we decide to ask the pilot up at the front of the airplane, where are we? And, what's our next step to get to Japan? They're like, I feel like we're about 2/3 of the way across the ocean. And in about 15 minutes, it's going to be appropriate that I'm going to turn just left about this much where it feels good. And then we're going to be there in no time. Trust me, it's going to be great. You're going to be thinking, oh my God, get me off this plane. If you went and asked the pilot, that same question, and they told you, oh, well, according to our GPS points, we've been crossing over these points. The wind shear is this much. It's causing a drag of this much. There's a storm here. And so we've got to move our airplane this way and go this many degrees. And then when we get to this latitude line, if they're actually giving you data, you're going to be a lot more comfortable about trusting that pilot's judgment to get you where you want to go.
Yes, and being that I'm one of those people that's not too comfortable with flying, you picked a very good metaphor.
That's a good one.
And to me, I also came from teaching, and I had a really amazing principal, and she was an outstanding person. And one thing that she always liked to see from me was data. And she even told me when she hired me, she said that I really believe in data beyond just the grades of your kids in the classroom. She says, I would like to see, as much data as you can possibly give that would reflect how the kids are actually doing in your classroom and how far they're going to meeting the goals that were set in the annual meetings. And I really love that. Me being a behavior analyst, I was like, you want data? Let's get some data. And the interesting thing is, she actually said that we collect data on things that are important to us. She says we check our bank statements, on a nightly, weekly, monthly basis because money is important to us. She says that we collect data on our weight. We check where our weight is. We count our calories. We talk about we measure our workout routines. All of these things that are important to us, we collect data on and we measure those things. And I really think when we're talking about the well-being of the animals that are in our care, whether we're living with them, working with them, whatever that relationship is, that we should have that same level of care, that we should care enough about the efficiency of our programs and their well-being to collect data that would be reflective of the process that we're implementing.
I love that, because that really was one of the things I was thinking about, because, your site is titled Constructional Approach to Animal Welfare and Training. And I think that's a really good point. We can talk about the constructional approach, but how does it tie into animal welfare? And you really just hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah. And the other thing that I love about the constructional approach too, as far as when we're talking about welfare, is oftentimes the goal on the welfare. Like, what is it really? Mm-hmm. And it can end up being all sorts of crazy things that are maybe not necessarily tied to welfare. And like, if we just get so hung up on animal welfare being that we provide food and this amount of space, is that really welfare? If you've got, an animal, although they've got a full coat of fur and they're the appropriate weight size and they've got their 2 acres of land for that one animal, does that really mean that they're in a good welfare state? And I don't know that most of us would say that that's the case, because I think that that's one of the issues a lot of people have about these things, is that a lot of the welfare measures that we have seem to sample at best a part of what we might consider to be good welfare. Mm-hmm. And so I think the constructional approach, asking us, what is that goal? What does good animal welfare actually look like? If we're looking at a giraffe or a dog or a tortoise and we're saying that animal's got a really good, welfare condition, what is it that we would actually see? And then finding out how to measure those things, I think is a really powerful component that the constructional approach has to offer.
Yeah. I would like to see more individualized, because the dog living in Japan and the dog living in the farm in the USA is totally different environment, totally different resources, different house, different family. So I would like to see more individualized measure for that animal, for that family. Yeah, because if we have a standardized measure, it may not be applied to this country or this zoo or this animal shelter, and they may feel guilty.
Yeah.
And they may feel like, lost, like I'm not qualified enough. So it needs to be individualized.
And the other big benefit too is the nonlinear analysis. A great example, I wish I'm going to look this up and I'm going to figure out this amazing scientist's name. The work she's doing is, I've never seen anything this fantastic, or the thinking process. It just swept me off of my feet. I will find it and I will try and send it to you. Hopefully we can put it as a link or something for people to read.
Sure.
This scientist, she is, I believe, some sort of canine cognition, or I can't recall what her degree is, but something related to dogs and animals. And her place of interest is India. And they've got millions of stray dogs. And it's become a huge problem in areas, specific areas of India, where these dogs now are basically fighting for food, with the people that live out there. There's attacks happening, and there's a huge problem. And she went out there to go solve that problem. And she goes out there and does an analysis of the situation. And she realizes how many dogs there are in these areas. She looks at the numbers on how much it costs to do spay and neutering programs and to get, rescues in to get these dogs out of India. And she realizes that linear approach, and that's a linear approach. We see the problem. We're going to either address the antecedent side or the consequent side. And that's the beginning and end of the analysis. What your approach would be to spay and neuter animals and get the ones that are there out. And that would be your linear approach to it. But she understands that, one, the financial ability to get all of those animals spayed and neutered, especially fast enough before they have a chance to reproduce, is not a realistic approach to the problem. And then she even said she said, if every rescue organization on the planet was pulling ships up to India to get these dogs out, we still wouldn't get them out fast enough. And so her nonlinear solution, and she says, well, these aren't going to be realistic options. So what we maybe need to be thinking about are, what are the needs of the dogs? What are the needs of the humans in these areas? And how can we set up the environment so that both of these organisms are living in harmony together? And so the solution isn't to gather them all up, spay and neuter them, or try and get them adopted. The solution is to recognize that they're there, and how can we actually live in harmony with these animals that are now coexisting in the space with us?
Cool. Yeah, I was going to ask you, because I don't think we touched on the nonlinear contingency analysis earlier when we were going through the 5 steps of, elements of a constructional approach. And so maybe, I don't know, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit there? I know you gave that example, but maybe add a little bit to that.
Yeah. And, it was kind of snuck in. Masa gave really good descriptions of the constructional questionnaire.
Right.
And it's the questionnaire that helps us to reveal the nonlinear relationships that are existing. Mm-hmm. And what we mean by that is, we often think about behavior. We've been conceptualized to think about behavior as a straight 3-term contingency, antecedent, behavior, consequence. And so we give a dog a cue to sit, the dog sits, they receive a food treat when they sit. But we have to consider that for that dog in that moment, and also for anything on this planet, when we're engaging in one behavior, that's not the only behavior that we have the option to engage in. And that food treat is also not the only consequence that's provided to the dog when they sit. There's also consequences of weight relief whenever they sit down, weight coming off of their hips and their shoulders. There's maybe, even if the dog's arthritic, maybe there's actually pain in the process of sitting down or laying down. And so there's consequences, other ones that are also there whenever we're giving that food treat. And so we have to figure out, why are we choosing to engage in the behavior we're doing now instead of any number of the other options? And that's where we have to get into a nonlinear analysis and realize that at any given moment with that ABC, that we have that ABC that we're reacting to, and it has costs and benefits. But there's also 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, endless other ABCs that are also occurring. And it's the costs and benefits between the behavior that we're doing and the alternatives that actually washes out to the behavior that we're doing now. That's a really watered down, simplified way to talk about it. But it provides a really powerful way to look at things and to understand that sometimes the situation at hand isn't really completely what needs to be addressed. Yes. And one really small, quick example that we can give on a nonlinear relationship is, we were helping an individual with a dog that they had rescued recently. It was a family that had rescued a dog. And we were contacted by a member of that family. And they had their goals for that dog, but the family had different goals. And as a matter of fact, when we asked the question, when Masa asked the mom, what would your goal be with this dog? The mom responded that dog would be independent. It would take care of itself. It would entertain itself, and it would be happy on its own. But, Masa was really crafty. She understands that is a report that's a reflection of the current contingency that the mom is in. The reason why the mom's saying that is because now when mom gets close to the dog's jumping and biting all over her and mouthing and going bananas. And so what our question ends up changing into is, okay, well, I understand that makes sense. That can be a nice goal to have, where you've got a dog that's very entertained and has things to do. But what kinds of interactions do you have right now with the dog that you do find pleasant? Oh, well, sometimes when the dog comes in and they're exhausted, they lay down right next to me and I pet them and we get to cuddle on the couch. And those are the things that we're doing right now that I really love. And so then you start to realize, okay, so the goal isn't the dog to leave you alone and be preoccupied by itself all day. What you really want is the dog to be inside laying with you. And so that's a funny way of how sometimes contingencies can be addressed. That problem behavior can be addressed without ever actually even having to address that problem behavior. Much like the barking dog example at the very beginning that I'd referenced, where I said that I never went into a shelter looking to eliminate barking. The thing is what I do when I go in there is I realize that these dogs are likely barking because they want attention from the human that's going by. Not always. We can talk about a funny one later, but more often than not, it's because they want you. They want that human that's going by to stop and give them attention. And the reason why we can safely assume those things is because most of these dogs, there's food and treats already all over the floor. Most of them have toys in there too. And and when you go by, as a matter of fact, you can actually do a test. And that's our little assessment. We'll put our hand up against the door a few inches away from it and see if they come up and sniff it, see if they come up and bark and lash out at it. We see how they respond to the hand, and that gives us a good idea of it. But so when we know that their behavior is maintained by wanting attention from people, what I do is I just go in and I give it to them. And so I go in there, the dog's barking, jumping, doing all the crazy things that the shelter dogs do. And I don't ever sit there and think, wait for no barking. All I'm thinking is that I want a dog that's standing on all 4 feet, sitting or lying down next to me while I'm giving it affection. And so I just wait for the minute all 4 feet are on the ground. And I start petting them for that. The minute they sit and lie down, I start petting them with 2 hands. And as a result of petting for these classes of behaviors, you don't see any of these other things. The reason why the dog's barking and jumping and going bananas is because to them, that's the best way to get attention. When they realize that they can get more of that attention and better amounts and types of it by sitting and lying down next to you, they'll quickly go to those behaviors.
Yeah. So with this example, if we look at the barking with linear, just barking behavior with what's the antecedent, what's the consequence, and then do the analysis. But also if we do another nonlinear analysis, looking at barking, but what are other alternative behavior that the dog already have to get the same consequence? We will know, through nonlinear analysis lens, the dog don't have any behavior. Like if the dog approach the person, the person will ignore. If the dog will sit or lie down, the staff can do other job.
Yeah, no one ever told that dog that they were on a job interview.
Exactly. So through the linear analysis and the nonlinear analysis, we have a different lens per se. We have a different answer or different contingency that we know that we can work. So the linear analysis will go different program, and nonlinear analysis will allow us to design different program. And I love and I know you mentioned this before, but it's getting back to the functional reinforcers, and instead of these, and not that contrived reinforcers don't have a place, maybe when you were saying when we don't have an identifiable reinforcer, but certainly in these, you have identified the reinforcer, and instead of tossing treats for a quiet dog, you give the dog what he wants. Right, exactly.
Yeah. And the other really awesome outcome of that, coming back to the steps of the constructional approach, is we want to make sure that we're considering the maintaining consequences for the behavior that we teach.
Mhm.
And most people, when they adopt a dog and bring it home, they're not necessarily thinking about going to the store and buying training treats to be able to keep maintaining and reinforcing that behavior at home. But the one thing that every single family that adopts a dog is completely ready to deliver is their attention to that dog.
Mhm.
And when we have a dog that's already engaging in these really good behaviors, like whenever the person walks up to their enclosure and the dog walks up to the front and sits and wags and looks at them, when they see that, they're like, oh my gosh, look how sweet and well behaved this dog is. And we can explain, oh, it's because he's asking for your attention. Anytime that this dog walks up to you and all 4 feet are on the ground, they're sitting or lying down, love him up, give him lots of attention. If he walks away, let him walk away. All of a sudden, that family already has everything they need to start building the types of wonderful relationships that they're looking to have with that newly adopted family member.
Yeah.
So you guys have been getting the opportunity to apply this where you're located, correct?
Yeah, and we did a lot in Texas while part of Orca.
Ah, okay, yeah. So that's got to be really reinforcing for you as well. Getting all this.
It is. I love the shelter stuff too, for obvious reasons. But some of the more surprising areas where this has been the most rewarding has actually been with therapy dogs and also with outreach animals for zoo programs. And the thing that used to, it just ached my heart whenever I would see this. But while I was in grad school, the way that I survived was I was a special needs teacher for a public school. And I would see the therapy dogs coming in for the reading programs. And the dogs, you would see that sometimes they really loved doing what they were doing, and they would go curl into the student's lap, lay next to him while the kid reads and pets them. And they obviously were comfortable and enjoying it, but there were other ones that were trying to get away. And the handlers, instead of letting them get away and letting the dog go somewhere else, they would lure it back with a treat and put it in place and force the dog to stay in position while the kids came and got close to it and read to it. And the dogs would be visibly uncomfortable with the situation. And what I would do, I would intervene as politely as I possibly could in the moment. And I would just, try and explain, I would try and talk about constructional affection in a way that didn't make them feel like they were doing anything bad. And because I don't want to be like, hey, do you see that your dog's stressed? You're not listening to it. Instead, I would usually go up to one of my students and I would say, hey, what I would love to see you do, when you see this dog, offer your hand out like that and see if they come and sniff it. And I want you to find a dog that's really going to want to come up to you and hang out with you. So let's see which one that we can get to come to us. And that was always how I'd like to then start these reading sessions. It's kind of like in the skating rink back in the day where all the boys would line up on the wall and the girls would come by and pick out who they want to skate with. I kind of like to have that be the thing with the kids and the dogs, where the dogs get to pick who they're going to read with, or if they're going to do it at all. But incorporating that philosophy in service dogs, to me, really helps us to make sure that our service dogs have a clear voice in saying whether or not they want to engage in this moment right now. Because I don't always think that it's the best thing to just force these dogs into these social situations when they're not really wanting to be there.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it was very similar too with a lot of the outreach animals that I was working with as part of the zoos that I was associated with. You would see a lot of those animals being very uncomfortable when brought to the schools or out in the main area of the zoo. And so getting them where they could communicate with their handler that they're wanting to engage or not was also something that I really, really love to see.
Time for your second secret word. And the secret word is constructional. Constructional. All right, let's get back to the program.
So now that, I think a lot of people have been exposed to a linear contingency analysis, and even though the constructional approach has been around for a while, but it's maybe not as popularized as some other approaches. I don't know, maybe you can share your experience, or what do you think might be the the experience with getting more people to implement a constructional approach. How receptive are animal trainers, how challenging it might be to implement. I've had some experiences myself, introducing this to some of my clients, but I certainly have felt pushback, especially when it's using a negative reinforcement contingency. And I know others, that we know that are using this as well have had some pushback from that. What's your feeling on that, or what has your experience been with that?
It's definitely not been something that was, when Izzy put it out, it wasn't like the world just absorbed it with open arms, like I would have had in my dreams, but we have to be constructional with that situation. And I'm over the moon right now with where the constructional approach is, not just in animal training, but even in education and just in general. It seems like the constructional approach is getting a much larger spread today than you might have suspected 10 years ago.
I agree.
And I've never actually had direct pushback on the constructional approach. I've never once presented it or even my work using the constructional approach, even when it involved negative reinforcement, and had it not recepted really well. And I think it's because the constructional approach, when we look at how it's using procedures, even when it happens to be a negative reinforcement one, when you see the way that the procedures are designed and the way that they're implemented and the outcomes that it has for the animals, I think it's inarguable to say that the animal didn't have a good experience going through that training, or is in a much better spot now than they were at the beginning. And the pushback too that does happen, I think, is often a little bit funny, because the constructional approach, whether or not all 5 aspects are readily adapted into programs, inevitably pieces of it you see all over the place. Aspects of the constructional approach have been readily adapted, I think, piece at a time in a lot of training approaches. And that's really exciting. And so that's the funny thing when I see that some individuals have an issue with parts of it, because I think that there's actually less disagreement than we might think. And even when we talk about negative reinforcement, I don't think any one of us would argue that the way that negative reinforcement has been used, like the way that Masa talks about with natural horsemanship and a few other methods like that are mainstream approaches of how people conceptualize negative reinforcement. I don't think any one of us would disagree that that's wrong and we shouldn't be doing that to animals, or humans, especially either. I don't think that anyone would really advocate for that approach.
Yeah.
But the thing is I also don't think anyone would argue when they see the way that today the constructional aggression treatment is being carried out, and the work that Jesus and his ORCA students or ourselves are carrying out CAAWT procedures these days. I don't think anyone would actually say, hey, that's really bad what you're doing, and those animals are uncomfortable, or even those people. I think that what you would see in those situations, when you see the way that it's carried out, especially when it's done constructionally, and we're using all 5 of the critical features of a constructional approach, critically using that data collection, I think you're going to see that these programs, when we're using negative reinforcement or positive, are these continually, progressive, free choice. We don't ever force our animals into any of these situations. We don't ever make any reinforcers specific just for engaging with us. We never remove consequences for problem behavior. But yet these animals continue to come to us, work with us, enjoy us, and you see their behavior continually progress at a beautiful rate, which all of these things are those key indicators that we even look for in our positive reinforcement training to tell us that the animals are enjoying what we're presenting to them. And we can see that too. And so the thing that I love that I hear most of the really big trainers talking about in regards to this is that it's not the procedure. Negative reinforcement is not bad. Positive reinforcement is not good. Good and bad, those should really be artifacts of the outcomes of the procedures and the impacts it has on our learners. And so as long as we're making sure that our programs are expanding degrees of freedom and not restricting, I think that we can be in a much better assessment space to determine if the programs that we're implementing are good for the animals or not.
Yeah. I remember we recently a cat group class for our Japanese audience, and lots of people have a question of, negative reinforcement is bad. But then when we have this slide where we distinguish between applying new painful stimulus that the human created, like natural horsemanship, like put in a pressure or give a little whip on the very sensitive area on the horse to get the horse move in a desirable direction. That's application of negative reinforcement. But in the cat procedure, we are not creating new one. We are using the existing one that the animal has been living forever. We're using that, but in a level that the animal can be just being alert, just noticing that this aversive stimulus is there, and then giving them control over that aversive situation and start to shape more desirable behavior. So that is a totally different application of negative reinforcement. Mm-hmm. And when the participant learned that, they were like, oh, wow, that was a aha moment. That's a good distinction to have. So we can't say, because negative reinforcement is bad, we have to look at how are they applying, what's the stimulus that they are using, how they are delivering, what's the consequence. We have to know all of that to say, this is something that I want to use or not.
Yeah. And piggybacking off of that, whenever we find these dogs that are living in these situations or animals in general, when we don't use CAAWT and help teach them how to get control over that circumstance that they're experiencing every day, we literally are just leaving them in a negative reinforcement contingency for the rest of their life, no matter how much positive reinforcement we're attempting to superimpose on that situation.
Yeah. I was going to say, I recently rewatched the presentation that Morgan Katz did for your Constructional Approach to Animal Welfare and Training Conference last year that you posted in your group. And I really loved the section where she had video clips of dogs that were basically sort of fighting through that fear response to take food items. Yeah. And you really saw, and Morgan really did such a great job of explaining what she was observing there and basically how dangerous it was, where these animals that, had a history of showing aggressive responses, and they're basically fighting through that aggressive response and, saying, well, yeah, I kind of want the food, but I really want nothing to do with you as a aversive stimulus. And then instead using a constructional aggression treatment and having these animals go to the point that they're approaching her and nudging her hand to be, having touch, and her having to make these really important decisions about, I'm really going to resist the temptation to really get in there and touch you right now, because I know you're not quite ready for it. We're still building those approximations, but building those approximations with negative reinforcement by removing herself. But this is a dog that's approaching her, nudging her hand, basically requesting touch. But she's saying, I'm just going to let you, walk under my hand, and I'm going to walk away now and then wait for you to nudge me more and basically request more touching by removing myself, as opposed to trying to, force you to approach me and take food from me when you don't want me to be a part of this equation for you to acquire food as a potential reinforcer, which the animal really didn't want. So it was a really nice demonstration of how using food to try to get an animal to engage versus the functional reinforcer of removing yourself, and the dichotomy of those two different approaches. And so I thought, I would much rather teach somebody the removal of the stimulus than trying to superimpose positive reinforcement, as you were saying there. So I think, if I were to compare what I would want to teach somebody to use as a procedure in a situation where negative reinforcement is the maintaining consequence, I would want to use the appropriate contingency.
Right.
And this gets to a funny point too on what we label as effective as a treatment. And we can never actually say that we're effective at addressing a negative reinforcement contingency when we're adding a positive reinforcement contingency to it. It will never happen. The negative reinforcement contingency will never be contacted by a positive reinforcement contingency. What we've done, you can't even have a DRA in that situation. What it is just a competing contingency where I can have the choice to engage in these stimuli and get these consequences with this behavior, or I can do this behavior in front of these stimuli and consequences and get these. So you got a choice now. So it's never going to resolve it. And that was one thing I loved about Ken Ramirez's public presentation he did on CAAWT years ago, or not on CAAWT. He did it on counter conditioning that he had done with a group of dogs that were given to him from an animal shelter. And at the end, he was very clear. And he said that we cannot actually say that these animals are cured of aggression. He said the negative reinforcement contingency had never been addressed. But what he did say is that the only thing he could guarantee is that in this setting with these groups of dogs, that more than likely he would not expect to see an aggressive outbreak or aggressive behavior, come out of it. And so we want to make sure when we find a negative reinforcement contingency that we actually address it for the animal. We can't be led to say that our procedure was effective just because you don't see growling and lunging anymore. And I think that's a fundamental mistake that we can run into when we find reactive dogs and we start using food treats to reward different behaviors. We say, okay, well, now the dog's looking at me when I'm going by other dogs, so this treatment was effective. Maybe not, because what happens when we run out of treats, or what happens when we're so close to other dogs that their closeness is a bigger aversive contingency than my food is good. And so we can't ever say that we were actually effective in dealing with the contingency because we never actually trained in that contingency to say that that behavior was going to now appear there. And so it's important that if we want to address a contingency or a situation, that we train in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Whoa. Deep stuff. I hope everybody's listening. I'm taking this all in.
I probably put them to sleep like 10 minutes ago.
No. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that, like this, for these past 2 years for me, I just feel like all this stuff just, exploded for me in terms of learning about this and learning about non-contingency or nonlinear contingency analysis. And again, as somebody who's been in the industry for a long time and having been taught a certain way and kind of, just plodded along that way, all this is really great to have and eye-opening. And I was recently, saying that I really feel like we are at a really another cool, critical point in animal training where things are changing. And like you said, even though constructional approach has been around for a while, but maybe sort of laying low, it's kind of cool that all this is coming to the surface and getting more attention now lately. And I hope it really will change the way we think about animal training and the way that we view animal training, and that more people will get exposure. And I hope this podcast will help people, get people excited and inspired and intrigued, and they'll do a little bit more exploration into the topic. Shall we do a plug for Joe's book? He'd probably appreciate that, huh? There's a new book by Joe Lang and Paul Andranis and Trent Codd. And I don't know you guys know how to say Awab's name.
Awab.
Yeah. Awab's last name, Abdel Jalil. We'll try and say it correctly, but it's the nonlinear contingency analysis. It just came out, and you can also get it on Vital textbooks if you want it as a digital version. So, which I like the digital versions myself. But that's another great resource on this information. But let's tell them about your site, the Constructional Approach to Animal Welfare and Training. So what are some of the things that people can participate in there and opportunities that you have to learn more about the constructional approach?
Yeah. And real quick too, I wanted to add just one thing in that I was thinking would be awesome for people to have. Often when we talk about nonlinear analysis and the stuff that we've been talking about today, it can sound really exciting and really cool, but then you're like, well, how do I do that?
Yeah.
So if anyone is just looking for a way to step into nonlinear analysis and start giving it a shot and seeing what you can find, there's always just one really good question you can ask yourself whenever you're working with an animal or doing, work with a client, is just to ask yourself, what is it that would happen if the animal did not engage in this behavior? If the animal did not do what I see them doing, what would it cost them, or what would they get out of it?
Yeah. If the dog is not barking, what are they going to get? Yeah.
And oftentimes when we answer that question, that will actually lead us to that nonlinear analysis of what it is that's actually getting into here that we can target, that would be outside of just focusing on eliminating that barking or reducing that barking. So instead of reducing the stimulus, like making the room quieter or actually playing background noise or rewarding the dog with food whenever they're being quiet in the house, we can actually ask, when they're doing this behavior, what is it that they're actually getting out of it? And if they didn't do this behavior, what would it cost them?
Nice. See? All right. This is the kind of stuff they can get on your website. Now we can segue into, all right, tell us more about what's on your site, the other opportunities they can learn about constructional approach.
Yeah, we designed the website intending to, one, we wanted to give a place where people could get in contact with other constructional trainers, other constructional people, to help get support and find information about, making constructional programs. And so the website is mainly just like a hub for everything that we have. It's CAAWT.com, CAAWT.com. And there you can see descriptions of what we are. We are a nonprofit. And the purpose of our nonprofit is to provide free training services to people, shelters, zoos, organizations that need help, need trainers, and can't necessarily afford it. And so those people that need these services and don't necessarily have the funds to get it, we like to be able to step in and help them. And so every time anyone gets access to our membership, gives us a donation, buys any of our services that we're providing, all of that money, all of it goes to providing free services for other individuals and organizations.
Yeah.
And but on there, we got loads of free stuff too that people can check out. We got lots of free videos, instructional videos. The Bailey interviews are on the webpage for free. And the Bailey interviews were an amazing project that Marion Bailey and Bob Bailey were working on throughout the 80s and 90s. Marion really wanted to interview all of the really big people in psychology, behavior analysis, animal training, sociology, anthropology. They went around the world and they found all of these top people in the field and interviewed them. There was over 240, I think, interviews that they had done. Unfortunately, Marion passed away before they were ever able to do anything with these interviews. So no one ever got to see any of these. They were filmed and put on a shelf and left there. So the Bailey interviews, whenever we were doing the On the Shoulders of Giants interviews, we were told that Bob had probably an interview that he had done on Gold Diamond. And so that led us to getting all of these interviews. And we have been slowly digitizing these and editing them and uploading them on YouTube for people to watch for free. So you can find that on our website too. But also you can find links to get into our membership and all of our group classes that we're doing. And that's the fun thing about the membership. If you get the premium subscription, you get half off to all of our group classes, webinars, the CAAWT conference coming up, the On the Shoulders of Giants biography is free.
CAAWT Lab.
Yeah, and CAAWT Lab and CAAWT Open House. And those are two really big fun things. I think they're the highlight of Masa's week every week.
Yeah, every week we get to spend with the members, and then we talk about important topic like we talked about today, like what's the construction approach, and then they can show us a training video, and then we can brainstorm together and then design the program.
Yeah. And so the open house is just what it sounds like. It's just like office hours for a professor at a university. We get on a Zoom meeting, and anyone who's buying any of our services at the time or a part of either one of our memberships, any of those people can come for those 2 hours and just jump into the Zoom meeting and stay the full time or however long you want. And it's just a spot for people to come in and ask any questions that they might have or have any discussions that they might want to have. And then CAAWT Lab is your college lab style type interaction where we meet for 1 hour on that week. And we have specific topics that the members have requested that we present about. But then we also have a presentation sign-up sheet where the members themselves sign up to present projects that they're working on to get feedback from the other members.
Right.
Yeah. And you also share so many great resources. Like I know you've pointed me and others in the direction of some great journal articles to read as well. And so you're always very generous with the information that you share. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we like sharing. We
We
love
do.
exploring together. We welcome all the challenging questions and explore together. So it's more, it's not like, we're a teacher or we're like, authority. We're like community. Like we learn together, support together, and then make a good thing for animal and people.
Yeah.
So
And Barbara, and you mentioned it earlier that you were going back and watching the open houses and Morgan's old presentation and all that. And on the membership page, we actually make all of the old presentations that we've done we're going to have more up soon. We got to get in contact with a few of our other presenters, but we're going to put all of our old CAAWT conferences and webinar presentations up there for people to watch, and just make it kind of a hub for people to get articles and videos and things like that on stuff that they're interested in.
that's right.
Yeah, well, I would highly recommend it because it's very quality information there. So a great opportunity for people. So what's that website again, just in case?
Yeah, it's CAAWT.com. And then if you go there, you'll see like membership, 2022 conference, and all of that resources. And Lily Chin's, the interaction guideline poster we did with Lily Chin is there for free to download. All of that is there.
Okay, great. Well, I will make sure all those links are on the page for where this podcast recording lives. Oh, and you also have a podcast as well too. So
that's right. Yeah, we do have a podcast. It's the same name as our company, Constructional Approach Animal Welfare and Training. And then we do a monthly podcast.
And you can also find us too on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. And the other fun thing about that is, and you don't have to be a member to enjoy this, but if you're on one of our social media pages, we go out to live stream training that we do at the shelters on Sundays. We've been taking a holiday break lately, but we'll be starting them up soon. So if you guys would like to join us in the shelter and see our training, keep an eye on our social media pages and we'll put the link there.
Yep.
Man, awesome. Well, that's so many good resources. Well, guys, I got to say, thank you so much for joining me. I learned a lot, and I think our audience will have learned a lot as well. So this was great, and I hope we get to do it again. Thank you, guys.
Awesome to be here.
Yes. Thank you so much.
What a pleasure speaking with Sean and Masa. And I hope you can see how this particular interview was really about bringing together all these bits and pieces together so you can see a little bit more about the constructional approach and how it's so much more than just using functional reinforcers or using the right contingency. There's just so much more to it. And I think one of the really important things that we're coming to is that this is kind of the future of animal training. We are evolving, and I love that we had that discussion there, that animal training moving forward needs to be looking at this kind of approach. So really stuff for us to be thinking about there. I hope it got your wheels turning and helping you think about the future of your animal training. I think this is really going to be, kind of life-changing for us all. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, visit that website, CAAWT.com. And again, I'll have links for you on the episode webpage so you can learn a lot more. Again, special thanks to Sean and Masa for joining me today. And I hope you guys enjoyed this return to our podcast. And hey guys, before we go, I wanted to let you know we've been offering a special discount if you join animaltrainingfundamentals.com, where you can get a 25% discount on our membership rate by using the special code sunglasses. Just pick a membership option and enter that code before you click subscribe. But that's going to be going away. We're probably going to end that in March, so March of 2022. So be sure to take advantage of that special discount before March, because we want to have you take advantage of all the great resources we have to offer for you, the animal training enthusiast and behavior science enthusiast, in animaltrainingfundamentals.com. All right, we'll look forward to seeing you here next time in the Animal Training Fundamentals podcast with me, your host, Barbara Heidenreich. If you liked what you heard today, visit animaltrainingfundamentals.com for more quality content on animal training. You'll find courses, community, and extensive video examples from my consulting work around the world. We'd love to have you join our force-free family.